So I went to a Catholic high school, and I remember once when I was about 16, we all had to get in a bus and we went to the local Buddhist temple, and the Buddhist monk had been booked in to give us an hour talk to all of us Catholic schoolboys about why he became a Buddhist monk, and I guess just the wonders of Buddhism and how it helped his life. And there were a few things that did stand out about this particular excursion to this Buddhist temple here in Melbourne in Australia. Now, one thing that I didn't really like about this monk was, even though he was quite chilled and he had an interesting French accent, and he was bald, but then again he was a monk, so what do you expect? He was talking about how when he was young, when he was a teenager, all he cared about was fast cars, women, and wanting to be successful. And he was talking about how he was very indulgent when he was younger, and then one day he realized that there was this emptiness within him that led to him becoming a monk. And I just did not relate to this story at all. And I don't think that this story influenced any of the other guys who went to school with me. I don't think any of them became Buddhist monks, but maybe they just never indulged in sex, drugs, and rock and roll to the extent that this Buddhist monk had done in his youth. But regardless, it was an interesting day out, and I don't think I learned much about Buddhism at all, but I did, as I say, like his accent. And while I didn't learn a whole lot from this Buddhist monk, and all I learned was that stereotypically he had been a bit wild in his youth, and he's sort of ping-ponged to the other side and become a Buddhist monk and had given up material possessions and all of that stuff, which is admirable, but I was just never somebody who was going to be a thrill seeker. I'm not the sort of person who chases women and drugs and rock and roll. Well, maybe rock and roll, but you know what I mean. Like, I don't chase money, that's for sure. But in retrospect, one of the more interesting things that happened at this excursion to the Buddhist temple was the fact that our religious education teacher, who was a guy in his, I think he was in his late 20s at this point, I'm not sure, he took us to this temple. And all of us boys are paying attention to the monk, you know, as you do. But our teacher, who was supposedly trying to get us into Buddhism, or at least educate us about different religions apart from our own religion, he actually grabs this cushion early on when the monk is talking. And in the middle of this monk talking, he just goes to sleep, curls up into a little ball like a cat and goes to sleep, which I always thought that was a little bit disrespectful, and I'm not sure what the whole point of what he was doing was. I guess he was quite tired. And at the time, I just remember thinking it was funny, because you find a lot of these things funny when you're a teenager. It's kind of funny to see your religious education teacher curl up into a ball. But I do wonder if that was actually a calculated message that he was putting forward, that at our Catholic school, our Catholic teacher would educate us about Buddhism and take us for an excursion to a Buddhist temple, only to undermine the religion and the Buddhist monk by going to sleep as a way of saying, everything you're saying is so boring, I'm going to go to sleep, and I hope that my students can see how ridiculous you look now trying to tell your Buddhist story while I am here sleeping. And I always wonder if that actually left an impact on me. I mean, I was only 16, so my brain was still developing, and the neurotransmitters and the wiring of my brain would have been cementing and telling me as a young boy that Buddhism is something to be ridiculed, and not just ridiculed as a result of the Catholic teacher who curled up like a little ball, but also the fact that the actual Buddhist monk wasn't exactly someone that I would look up to. It didn't feel like he was the highest quality of Buddhist monk that I could find at that point in my life. And this actually might have impacted me and how I viewed Buddhism as a lapsed Catholic as I got older. I remember in my 20s going to hostels, and it was often the Buddhists who annoyed me the most. White Buddhists. I shouldn't have a go at them for being white, but my point is that I would meet people who are ex-employees of, for instance, Google in like a Japanese hostel, and they would tell me outright that they are Buddhists. I remember this Buddhist from New York asking if I wanted to go out for sushi. This is my second day I'd ever been in Japan in my life, by the way. And I went walking with this Buddhist guy, and he was walking in this very alpha male way, and he was complaining about Japanese people pretending to be nice, but he said they're all assholes, and he started getting very angry at Japanese people for their meekness, and he was very demanding. Like when we went to get sushi, he would talk down to them. He was actually from Moscow, but he had a thick New York accent, and I think he'd grown up in America. And again, he'd worked at Google. I don't know, I didn't really like this guy. I remember we went back to the hostel, and this Buddhist guy, I went to sleep and I was charging my camera. I had a little camera at the time, this is a long time ago, and he actually grabbed my the electrical socket, and he grabbed my plug, and he threw it across the room, and he plugged in his own phone or whatever, and it was just very rude of him. And I just remember him insulting me all the time. So once again, I wasn't getting a very good view of what Buddhists are. Now, this did change significantly, I think, once I got into Buddhism and actually read about it, and I had a bit more respect for it just based on that alone. I also got a bit more into Buddhism by hanging out with my Japanese friends. Once I moved to Japan in 2014, and I remember, I think it was in Nikko, but I'm not sure, but I was hanging around with my Japanese friend, or different Japanese friends would take me to temples, and I would do all of the prayers, and we would have incense going and chanting, and it felt very Catholic to me, to be perfectly honest. I felt like the religious experience I was having was very similar to being young and being in a Catholic church. I don't know if it was just the incense and the prayers and the having a Buddhist priest there felt a bit similar to a Catholic priest. I don't know. I also got to meet a local Buddhist monk in training when I was living in Tokyo, because down the road, I don't know how far down the road it was, but there was a Zen Buddhist monastery, and he used to escape from training because he had to live in this monastery and live a good Zen Buddhist life. But he used to sneak away at night, and he used to come up the stairs of my guest house, and he was having a relationship with my British friend. She used to have this monk in a room overnight. She eventually got pregnant and went back to the UK, but she actually then went back to Japan, and I think they're married now actually, and I think they've got their kid, and she lives with this Buddhist monk, and it's all quite a lovely story. And he was a nice guy. He was a bit shy. He was a little bit embarrassed once when I said hi to him in the stairwell, because we were all on the top level of the guest house, but he seemed like a really nice guy to me. I really admired the fact that even though he was a Buddhist monk in training and he wasn't allowed to have relationships with women, he wasn't allowed alcohol, and he wasn't allowed to smoke. And I used to like the fact that I used to go out into my balcony and I used to be able to see him and the British girl smoking, drinking and fornicating. And well, I didn't watch them fornicate, but I kind of admired his relaxed attitude towards his strict faith, and it's something that I very much resonated with as a lapsed Catholic, I suppose. And as a side note, that British girl who was living with me, I really liked her a lot actually. She was a really awesome person to hang out with, and she also was brought up Catholic, so we had that bond as well, and I guess that explains the openness to Buddhism, I suppose. I wonder if she also had a similar experience when she was young in the UK. Maybe she also had to go on an excursion to a Buddhist temple, and maybe there was a Buddhist monk who was talking about his debauched past, and maybe that led her into the arms of this Japanese Buddhist monk in training. I don't know. And I guess this whole topic just makes me reflect on whether there is any real or imagined tension between the Catholic Church and Buddhism as a whole. We're often told that Buddhism is more a way of life and not really a religion, so you can get a lot of people who are Catholics who will do things that are more Buddhist, like meditation and mindfulness. But obviously there are some big differences between being a strong Catholic and being a Buddhist. But I do like watching how these cultures mesh, and it sometimes leads to quite funny results. And of course, when it comes to the question of me and Buddhism, am I going to convert to Buddhism? Is it something that you even need to convert to? Am I going to let my bad experiences with some Buddhists when I was young taint my view of Buddhism as I get older? I don't think so. I can see myself becoming a lot more Buddhist as I get older. I think it's probably quite good for the mind. On the other hand, I'm sure a lot of people who are more into Nietzsche and the idea of becoming an Übermensch, they might not like the idea of Buddhism quite as much, or am I wrong on that topic as well? Although I guess Nietzsche didn't like Christianity either. Anyway, I'm not really sure where I'm going with this, but let me know your thoughts in the comments, and I'll see you next time.